Welcome to the Dr. America Show. I am your host, Dr. Sanjeev Sriram, and we are on the We Act Radio Network. Thank you so much for joining us for this week's special episode, our Valentine's Day special, where we are going to be talking about the health of love, the health of sex, and a whole lot of other topics. There's a lot that's been going on in the news. We have gay marriage to talk about with the news that's going on in Alabama. We've got a special guest to talk to us about HIV and what we can do to stay healthy. And it's also Black History Month. And there's this really great anecdote story that I love to share at this time of year that is the convergence of Black history, medical history, and broken hearts. And I hope you guys enjoy that. But yeah, let's dive right in because let's talk about the health of love, and in particular, let's talk about what's been going on with gay marriage in Alabama. So, okay. Down in Alabama State, we had a series of court cases be decided, and most notably, there was a couple, Jim Strasser and John Humphrey, who were plaintiffs in a case who challenged Alabama's ban on gay marriage. And there was a federal appeals court judge who struck down the ban as unconstitutional. The people who were trying to uphold the ban appealed and tried to take it to the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court said no, the federal judge is right. This ban on gay marriage is unconstitutional. Now, you would think that this is the end of it, right? Because, Supreme Court is final authority in the land, and that, they say something is unconstitutional, then, it's just got to go. But no, down in Alabama, we have got a Alabama State Chief Justice, Roy Moore, who wrote an order to the county officials who issue marriage licenses to follow the state law banning gay marriage. Roy Moore went on to say that any of these probate judges who violate his order will be reprimanded by the governor. His words, and I quote, are effective immediately. No probate judge of the state of Alabama, nor any agent or employee of any Alabama probate judge shall issue or recognize a marriage license that is inconsistent with a constitutional amendment and state law banning same-sex unions. Wow. Okay, Judge, you need to get it together. Judge Roy Moore was wrong back in 2003, and this was back when you, Judge, refused to remove a 2.5-ton monument to the Ten Commandments at the Alabama Judicial Building. And no, really, you got to look this up. Judge Roy Moore lost his job 12 years ago because he refused to cooperate with a really basic ruling about the separation of church and state. And it sounds like you're wrong again, Governor. It's really just shameful. And, when I look at, news stories like today, today is February 10th, and we have Anne Suzanne DiPrizio, who is a woman in Autauga County. She was charged with a misdemeanor disorderly conduct this morning after offering to perform a same-sex marriage inside the probate judge's office. She is now being held on a $1,000 bond. And it's just amazing to me that we are criminalizing a woman who is basically trying to help a couple, enjoy their marriage rights, which the Supreme Court has protected. Judge and the legal community in Alabama, if you're cooperating with Judge Roy Moore, you are on the wrong side of history, you guys. You are really, really on the wrong side of this one. Before I get into some of that, some of you might be wondering, why is gay marriage a health issue? Let me try to explain it this way. Many of our health rights are actually tied to the legality or illegality or legal recognition of marriage. And, what you what you would need to have according to federal and state law is that you would have to have your marriage recognized, by law in order to enjoy or take advantage of some of the other privileges and rights that marriage confers. For example, if you want to be covered under a spouse's or parent's health insurance, then you would want that parent or spouse to be, and if their household is being defined by a legal marriage, then you're going to need to know that your, federal and state governments are recognizing that marriage as legal so that you, when you apply for coverage under your spouse's health insurance, that you will be covered, that nobody can be, that you cannot be denied that because your marriage wasn't recognized. Similarly, and perhaps even more basic than that, is spousal decision making in healthcare. I can just try to imagine any range of diagnoses, right? You can imagine that if you're facing an unfortunate end of life situation where you want your spouse, the person that you have spent maybe a lifetime with, or maybe you've spent a lot of your I mean, you've at least spent like some quality time building a romance and building a bond and building this relationship to the point where you are trusting this person with medical decisions when you yourself are incapacitated by, some kind of diagnosis, be that cancer or something terminal. You would want to know that your spouse's decisions are being honored by everybody involved, whether that's the healthcare system, the legal system, you name it. You would want that person who you have, called your spouse and who's calling you a spouse to actually have your relationship be respected in the world of law so that decisions can be made accordingly. I dread the idea that we would ever be stuck with a Terry Schiavo kind of situation where, somebody, somebody who is terminally ill is not having their adult relationship recognized, and now it's their parents who may have kicked them out is going to try and make their medical decisions when they've actually made it a point maybe to not be in their life, in this person's life anymore. So you can imagine, like, spousal decision making in healthcare is a big reason why we as doctors support gay marriage and the rights that come along with it. Similarly, with the Family Medical Leave Act, with paid sick days, whenever you see a piece of legislation that is about giving a worker the right to take care of a family member or loved one, that you would want that loved one to include same-sex spouses and people whose current marriage rights are up for question, because being able to take care of somebody, as we've talked about on this show before, is a basic part of public health, health justice, health rights, and so marriage is very much tied into all of that. I am not the only doctor who is making these connections. I am proud to say that the American Medical Association got it right on this one. The American Psychiatric Association has it right, and so does the American Academy of Pediatrics. They've all written very clear, very unequivocal policy statements giving their support for LGBTQ couples and giving them their full marriage rights. And I'm proud to be, to be part of the American Academy of Pediatrics on this one, because they actually pointed to children in particular and said that, children seem to have the best health outcomes when they live in households with two parents, regardless of whether those two parents are different sexes, same sexes, what have you. When both parents have the stability of a marriage where they're not in this legal limbo of are their finances going to be respected, are their health decisions going to be respected, the kids themselves do better when their parents have got that kind of legal stability. And so pediatricians are very much in favor of helping parents attain their full marriage rights. And I hope, Alabama, you need to get it together and really make this happen. Because when I look at, when I try to help my colleagues and my friends and my family try to understand why this issue matters to all of us, it's and when I say all of us, I mean all of us, regardless of our sexual orientation, race, religion, what have you. The reason why I feel, passionate about a lot of this is that whenever you hear the opposition talking, when you hear them, and these are some religious extremists, and that's not to say if you're religious, you're an extremist. It's just that, we all know who some of these folks are. It's like these holier than thou folks who, seem to take it upon themselves to bludgeon their faith upon everybody else. But when you really listen to their opposition to gay marriage, it's actually some very antiquated arguments that they used against other forms of marriage that all of us have become slowly but surely very comfortable with. And in particular, I point to two examples. One is interracial marriages. When you look at, how long it took for interracial marriage to be legal in this country, it is just striking. And these are people of the same faith, but of different skin color. And, when the fight for interracial marriage was going on in the 60s, again, with the Supreme Court, we had a lot of opponents who were saying that this would be the destruction of, modern civil society, just like they're kind of saying now. And I can tell you that since about 1967, which was when some of the Supreme Court cases were finally decided, and as each, state kind of came around to allowing for interracial faith or interracial marriages, what we're finding is the society is doing just fine. I've got friends, I've got family who are in, these really beautiful marriages, and they, it's all different kinds of colors coming together. And, our society is doing just fine. So the religious extremists are getting it wrong on this one. And even more basic than that is the second example, which is of interfaith marriages. Now, most religious communities are not really all that thrilled when their followers marry the followers of other communities. People who go to church are not really thrilled about their followers marrying people who go to mosques, vice versa. But it's, but when those people get together, it doesn't destroy anything. It doesn't wreck society as we know it. These institutions of faith are allowed to continue existing as they have been existing. And what we have instead is that before the law, in front of the law, these spouses are recognized, and their rights and their privileges and benefits are all protected. And that's exactly what we're talking about when it comes to gay marriage. We're talking about, it's not necessary for cultural and religious communities to, fully adopt this with open arms immediately. Like, there's no mandate on that. But what is necessary is that our institutions of law and that our other institutions where legal recognition of the relationship matters, that these couples have this protection. So if you want to know why, some of us feel so passionate about this issue without being of the LGBTQ community ourselves, it's because, we recognize that this is part of that moral arc of the universe where, we got to look out for each other. And I'm hoping, Alabama, that you get it together. I'm really hoping that more states, follow the example of 36 states and the District of Columbia in giving full legal recognition to marriage out there. I think it's the right thing to do for love. I think it's the right thing to do for health justice. And I really feel like the time has come, and I can't say it enough. Alabama, get it together. All right, when we come back, I want to talk about another story of love in Valentine's Day, and it's a nice little convergence of Black History Month and medical history. So when we come back, I'm going to be talking to you guys about the story of Dr. Vivian Thomas. You're listening to the Dr. America Show. I am your host, Dr. Sanjeev Sriram, on the We Act Radio Network. I'll be right back.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.
Welcome back to the Dr. America Show. I am your host, Dr. Sanjeev Sriram, and we are on the We Act Radio Network. Thank you so much for joining us today, guys. We are in our Valentine's Day special. And as you guys all know, this February is also Black History Month. And at this time of year, I always like to reflect on a particular story in our medical history where I feel is just such a interesting convergence of Black History Month, medical history, and a little bit about broken hearts, and that is the story of Dr. Vivian Thomas. So I just feel like the story has so much to teach us, and I really do like sharing it at this time of year. So for those of you who do not know, Dr. Vivian Thomas was an African American surgical technician who developed a procedure, a special heart procedure to treat babies with what's used to be called the blue baby syndrome, and he did this back in the 1940s. He was an assistant to a couple of other surgeons, Dr. Alfred Blaylock and Dr. Tausig. And many of us who are trained in pediatrics, and especially in pediatric cardiology, we are taught about the Blaylock-Tausig shunt, which is a special cardiac shunt. It's like a little tube that connects one vessel of the heart to another vessel, so that a child born with a heart defect can get oxygenated blood into their bloodstream and survive some of the biggest challenges that some of these heart defects have to offer. It's a very fundamental part of pediatric cardiology, and it's unfortunate that we don't remember always Vivian Thomas's contribution, which is why I like to tell this story. And this is because Vivian Thomas was coming up at a time when, in this country, we seem to have a very, very sad notion of who could and could not be a doctor and how we were going to help our fellow Americans become doctors. So I'm just going to take a quick moment to talk about Dr. Thomas's story because I just find his example so inspiring. So Dr. Thomas was born in New Iberia, Louisiana, and he was the grandson of a slave. And he was in high school in the 1920s and had every intention of becoming a doctor, but then the Great Depression comes along, completely derails everything that he wants to do. And so, he ended up, finding a job as a surgical research technician with Dr. Alfred Blaylock at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee. And pretty much right from the get-go, Thomas is just doing amazing work. He's really honed his skills. He's doing, just fantastic work helping Dr. Blaylock discover some of these amazing techniques for helping soldiers with battle wounds and actually changing the way that we think about hemorrhagic shock and how to help patients who have had devastating crush injuries recover. And he's doing an amazing job. And this is all despite the fact that by the mid 1930s, he's doing this work of a postdoctoral researcher in a lab, but he's being paid like a janitor. And he's got such a commitment to his work that he perseveres. And when it comes time for Dr. Blaylock to be take on a new challenging opportunity at Johns Hopkins, Dr. Blaylock actually told the people at Johns Hopkins that he would only come if he was allowed to bring his colleague Vivian Thomas along with him, because he knew that there was no future success and that trajectory was not going to go anywhere if he didn't bring his teammate along. And what's really particularly tragic is that you find that Vivian Thomas's family is enduring worse segregation in Baltimore, outside of Johns Hopkins and in the Johns Hopkins community, than anything that they ever endured in Nashville, Tennessee. But despite all of that, he actually, continues to contribute to the research being done in this lab until 1943, when they're approached by a pediatric cardiologist, Helen Tausig. And she's got, a group of patients and that have these particular set of heart defects where, the children are struggling to live, and a few of them do make it into like later parts of childhood. But what they all have in common is that, they got blue lips, they got blue fingertips, their circulation is not very good. And, Dr. Hausick has been looking at the work of Dr. Blaylock and Vivian Thomas and feels like there might be an opportunity there to take some of their research and actually adapt it to some of these pediatric cardiac patients. And so Dr. Thomas is looking at the work and is seeing that there is indeed the simple shunt that can be put in that will connect these two major blood vessels in the heart. And if it works, it's going to be fantastic for restoring oxygen flow to these children. And, just as they're about to operate, Dr. Blaylock is told by the Johns Hopkins community that Vivian Thomas cannot be the surgeon in charge of the operation. He has to be the assistant. And the reason why is because Vivian Thomas is an African American and the patient is white. So, despite this, horrible racism, Dr. Blaylock tells Vivian Thomas that he's going to be present in that surgical theater, and he's going to basically be the guide for Dr. Blaylock as he controls the scalpel and does all of the work. It's going to be under Vivian Thomas's leadership. And if it wasn't for this perseverance and this commitment to medicine, many of there are so many kids who would not be with us today. And so, I really do champion Vivian Thomas's work. I feel that to continue contributing to medical science despite the medical science community not really contributing to you, it breaks my heart, but at the same time, it fills my heart. It's like one of those stories that's bittersweet. And I hope it's an inspiration to more of us to persevere with our goals and our service, despite the obstacles that we face. And at the same time, to look at the current obstacles that we have that might be hindering the service of others. Because, we can do better. We should do better. As Americans, we owe it to each other to, be for medical science, the progress of medical science, regardless of the color of our skin, regardless of our backgrounds. When we see talent, when we see great work, we need to, do everything that we can to make those dreams possible. The happy ending for Vivian Thomas is that Johns Hopkins actually did later recognize and reward his work by giving him an honorary doctorate in 1976. Please take some time to learn about Vivian Thomas's story, especially if you have pediatricians or pediatric cardiologists in your life. I just find his example so inspiring. All right, so for this next segment of the program, we've been talking about love, we talked about broken hearts, and now I really want to talk about HIV. I think that, it's really important for us to have some news that we can all use and help our fellow Americans with this ongoing epidemic that is HIV. I'm really excited about the guest that we're going to be talking to, Mr. George Kerr. And before we bring him on, I want to just make sure that, we understand just how serious HIV continues to be in America. We've got 1.2 million people in the United States living with HIV. And of that, almost 1 in 7 are unaware of their infection. I mean, that number just blows my mind, every time I see it and hear it because it's 2015 and we seem to still be getting our butts handed to us by this virus. And then when you look at how the virus is actually experienced by different groups, there's these staggering disparities. And I'm really looking forward to our conversation with George Kerr so that we can learn more about how to protect each other and fight this disease together. So, to kind of just like make sure that we understand just how these disparities are weighing on us. When you look at the African American community, they represent approximately 12% of the general U.S. population, but they account for an estimated 44% of new HIV infections, which is just unbelievable burden of disease on one community. And it clearly should light a fire under our butts that we need to do something about this because this is a totally preventable illness. There is nothing inevitable about HIV. We have it within our reach to keep HIV negative people negative, and to help people who are HIV positive be aware of their illness and then continue living productive lives. Similarly, another group that is really facing an undue burden from this disease are men who have sex with men, MSM. You might hear that acronym again in this show. They represent about 4% of the male population in the United States, but in 2010, they accounted for 78% of new HIV infections. Again, just a staggering statistic, and hopefully we can start putting some humanity to the numbers in our conversation with George, which is coming up shortly. All right, so in the couple of minutes that we've got left before we talk with George, I just also wanted to point out that there's a geographic disparity with HIV, and that is that the disease actually does have a heavier burden in the South when compared to other regions of the country like the Northwest and the West. But that being said, I want to believe that, this land is our land, this land is your land. And, it should not matter, what we look like, who we love, where we are. HIV is something that none of us should have to suffer from, because it's totally preventable. So when we come back, we're going to be talking with George Kerr and learning from his insights. I hope you guys will find this interview useful, inspiring, and motivating, so that we can turn the corner on HIV. You've been listening to Dr. America. I am your host, Dr. Sanjeev Sriram. This is the We Act Radio Network, and this is a very special episode, our Valentine's Day special. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll be right back.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.
Welcome back to the Dr. America Show. I am your host, Dr. Sanjeev Sriram, and thank you for joining us. This is a very special Valentine's Day episode for you guys. We've been talking about love, we've been talking about broken hearts, and now we're going to be talking about HIV with our very special guest, Mr. George Kerr. Really excited to have him on. And before we bring him in, I just want to, do a little introduction so that you guys can get to know George and the amazing work that he does. So George is an award-winning public health activist, advocate, and senior administrator. He has worked on HIV, AIDS, and substance abuse treatment and prevention issues in underserved communities on the local, national, and international level for 20 years. Throughout those years, Kerr has served in management for the global profit FHI 360, and during his 8-year tenure as a decorated veteran of the United States Navy. As the founding executive director, Kerr has also led, developed, and coordinated services, resources, programs for such nonprofits as Syringe Treatment Advocacy Resources and Training, which spells START, at Westminster Presbyterian Church. And as a devoted community steward, Kerr has also served on the advisory boards for the DC Fights Back, the Washington Free Clinic, Federal AIDS Policy Partnership, the International Network of Religious Leaders Living with or Personally Affected by HIV/AIDS, and on the Places of Worship Steering Committee for the DC Department of Health. He has also contributed as a co-moderator for the Presbyterian AIDS Network And as a longtime DC resident, George Kerr has engaged in these collective efforts as an openly gay, HIV positive man of faith with deep spiritual and cultural roots in the DC, Maryland, and Virginia area. We're really excited to have George on the program. Thank you so much for joining us, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, yeah. And, I'd like for our audience to hear your story and how you got involved with AIDS activism. If you don't mind, can you just tell us, how and when you got started and, what got you motivated for joining this important cause?
Sure. Thank you again for having me. Back in 1993, I had left the U.S. Navy, and here where I worked for 8 years, and I went to work for a local organization that was doing international work, and that was called Family Health International at the time. And I actually ended up working there for 19 years. And so in 2004, I decided, well, this is not enough just to be helping people internationally. We need to bring it locally. So I started looking at what I could do, and so I just basically just started going to meetings, community meetings, and just listening. And then in 2005, I partnered with Alex Lawson, and we co-founded DC Fights Back. And it was an HIV/AIDS activist group, and we were really pushing the city to make them aware and to make changes within the city. And so I did that for about 5 years, and then in 2008, I said, well, I've done the activism work, and I've worked on it, so now it's time to be even more involved. And that's when I co-founded Start at Westminster. And as you said, that was a syringe training advocacy resource and treatment. And what it is a harm reduction philosophy that we have started, and really motivated with the communities that needed more attention, the underserved, LGBT, people of color, people who are often left out of this discussion, people who really needed that voice.
Right, and I'm really impressed with that part of your story, because I do feel that we have communities that are in need of our compassion and our outreach, but we seem to have trouble really making that connection. And from what I've read and seen about AIDS in America, it looks like our country had such a really hard time just coming to terms with the fact that this is a challenge from biology, not morality. And despite the 1980s being a time of rapid technological growth, Americans did not widely accept that AIDS was due to a virus. What are some of the other challenges that you and the HIV/AIDS community has faced over these years?
I think that the biggest one, besides funding, of course, is the stigma that is associated with it. There's just too many times people are pointing and saying, those dirty people, or you did something wrong, or even not even knowing the science about it. And I think that that's really true today, that we still don't know quite enough, or people that work on it on a daily basis know it, but I don't think the general public know the science that goes behind HIV and how it's contracted and how we can prevent it.
And I guess when it comes to this particular virus, what I find challenging is that it's not. We're now looking at a virus that has been in our borders and part of our lives for over 30 years. We're getting close to 40 years. And it's just striking to me that in an age with so much technological advance, that we still have such trouble understanding this particular disease. Why do you think that is?
Well, I just think that let me just say this: we have come a long ways, and we made a lot of progression. But there's still the stigma that's involved with that, and So what we really need to do is increase our toolbox for prevention. And this includes educating the community. One of the biggest problems I see, besides the lack of funding, is the criminalization of HIV. Literally, people are being arrested for being HIV positive.
Oh,
and
wow.
so there can be times when it's a simple he said or she said that they didn't tell me. In some cases, the virus is not even being transmitted. So I think just the basic science that is missing there.
Right.
And the medical treatment has gotten a lot easier. Back when I was infected, at one point in the early 90s, I was taking up to 27 pills a day.
Oh, wow.
And now they've got it down to where you can take it 1 pill a day. So they've made it a lot easier, and the side effects is not as harsh as they used to be.
Okay.
But once again, the price tag is very expensive.
Okay, and I mean, let's dig into that a little bit. So, we've got, some technological progress in terms of our biotechnology. And I mean, it's great that we're getting down from, 27 pills a day to 1. But, this issue of the cost, I mean, like, this is kind of where, this is like one of those fronts of the HIV struggle that is that it really does fall on socioeconomic lines. What do you feel the activist community has been successful with helping HIV patients overcome this hurdle?
Well, I think that making it Congress in particular aware that how important ADAP is, and that's the Drug Assistance Program.
Okay.
And even though we have the Affordable Care Act, that program is still extremely important because, like I said, the pills are very expensive. So, and then there's also, the medical side of it, but, when someone's HIV positive, it's not just the medicine they have to be worried about. There's the mental health, there's the housing, there's treating the whole person. So we really need to dive in and really start looking at really helping the whole person and to empower them. Right now, the direction that I'm seeing is that we're really paying attention to the care side, the medical side, but the other sides are lacking, and we really need more advocacy with that so that we can get additional funding.
Right. And I mean, that medical side gets completely undermined when we don't take care of some of these socioeconomic factors that, are very much a part of our brothers and sisters' health. And so, I want to come back for a second to what you were talking about before with regards to the stigma, because I've seen that in my own medical practice and my own career where, I've watched patients really, struggle with the stigma and the shadow of HIV. And I was curious if you have any perspectives on how that stigma has changed, like where have there been improvements and where do you see problems persisting?
Well, I think it's really on the individual level, and it's the individual that we have to really focus on, and in that community. The lower the socioeconomic is, the less education there is, the more apt there's stigma there. There are true champions that are out in the community, in the local communities, that are doing this work, but a lot of times they're not getting enough funding to do more of it. So really having to strive to get the prevention money out into that grassroots type of environment.
Right, so that it's actually customized and tailored to the local individual experience. I see what you're saying there.
It's really kind of peer-to-peer in some cases, or community health workers. Just and sometimes a lot that it has is someone just needs to sit down and have a conversation.
Right.
And see what the individual concerns are.
Yeah, no, and you're absolutely right, because somebody who's rooted in that neighborhood, who actually kind of lives with all of the things that you were describing before about about housing and and the types of jobs that communities have. I think that when the healthcare worker is actually invested personally in those communities in that way, and rises and falls with with their brothers and sisters, it actually makes for a much more personalized experience with counseling.
Correct. Yeah, I agree 100%.
So when it comes to I mean, I do feel that the stigma of HIV is a big factor when it comes to people not knowing that they are even infected. And what I find kind of, when we dig into some of the statistics even further, I was really struck by just how disparate our communities are with their experience with HIV, because it looks like, I mean, we've got some really high rates among some communities in some regions of the country, and then we have not so high rates with other regions and other communities. And I was wondering if you could just sort of summarize and help us understand what's going on there with those disparities.
Sure. More than 1.2 million people in the United States are living with HIV, and that's what you quoted earlier. And that's as of 2011. That's the latest data that we have at this time. That's about almost 1 in 7, 14% are unaware of their infection. And there's many, many reasons why people don't want to get to know their status. And I think one of the biggest things that we're fighting right now is the criminalization portion of it. HIV is the only HIV and now hepatitis C are the only two medical diseases or viruses that you can get and be criminalized over. Everything else, there's no criminalization. So I think that has a lot to play with it. And then also, like we were saying, stigma has a lot to do with it. The HIV incidence, the new infection, the estimate incidence of HIV has remained stable overall in the recent year. It's about 50,000 new infections per year.
Wow.
Within the overall estimate, however, some small groups are affected more than others, and especially young men of color, the MSM community of color. And they are really the ones that's taking a big hit with this. So there needs to be more research and more attention to this population that needs to take place. By race, though, blacks and African Americans have faces the most severe burden. And then injection drug uses represent about 8% of new infection in 2010 and about 15% in 2011. However, there is a federal ban on needle exchange, and so there is no funding from the CDC or NIH to really look at that as a prevention tool. And in D.C., before 2007, we had a federal restriction by Congress saying we couldn't use our local money. Then in 2008, when we started using it, from 2008 to 2012, we saw a drop by 80% of new infection rates.
Wow.
So that is a huge, huge number.
Yeah.
And so we need to work extra hard as activists to really get that federal ban lifted and to really put science back into and not morality.
Right. Yeah, no, because there's such an impressive scientific evidence base for needle exchange and for a lot of what you're talking about, and it's tragic that the policy discussion is not being guided by the science, but is being guided by a misguided what I would describe as kind of a misguided mythology of morality.
Correct. However, I think we need to just keep putting a human face with the virus. If we have one person suffer, we have too many people suffering. So we know how to end this epidemic. We just now need to put the tools in the toolbox so that we can end it.
Yeah, so why don't we talk about some of those tools? I mean, I think that we've got some public health innovations which are, pretty, tried and tested, and they've withstood the test of time, so to speak. And then we have some new innovations, that are kind of more recent. And I was wondering if you have some thoughts or feelings about some of the old versus new ways of stopping HIV.
I think I don't want to call it old, but one of the biggest things that I think that we need is, now that we have treatment as a whole, we need the community to start talking about it more. We really stopped having these conversations, so we really need to push that. And so we need to keep pushing the conversations everywhere. And this is in the communities, in our churches, in our doctors' offices, everywhere that we can really push the conversation about how, if someone is negative, how to keep them negative, and if they are positive, how to get them virally suppressed so that they can it reduces the risk of them transferring the virus.
Right. So, I mean, you mentioned the faith community, and since you're very active in your church, I'm very active in my clinic. I'm actually curious about that, that community's approach to talking about HIV in maybe some refreshing kind of ways, and in ways that the church community might not have heard before. So, can you tell us your experience with bringing these discussions to church?
Well, I could speak personally to my own church, and they were extremely open to the idea. I mean, how I started coming to this church was because I was coming to an activist meeting where we were bringing caravans across the United States to D.C. to protest for HIV and science base. And so when I first came to that first meeting, I was hooked, because this is very much a social justice church. There are other churches in the area that are having these conversations, but part of the problem also is there's not enough of them having the conversation. We need pastors speaking from the pulpit, and we need other, not just Christian. We need every faith community to really be talking about this. And how do we engage them? Every faith community has to be approached differently. So we need to have those conversations on how we can address some of these issues. Here at my church, we're able to put condoms in the church for people, and it's called Saving Lives Condom Distribution. But not everyone's going to be able to do that.
Right.
So we really just need every church to look at how far they can go and really start taking those steps, really stepping out of the box.
Yeah, and I think it's just like you said, it's this out of the box thinking that I feel will make a big difference for people's lives as we move forward on our experiences and struggles with HIV. But before we go, I'd really like to give you a chance to plug your organizations, because I feel like these groups are doing tremendous work, and I'd love for our audience to connect with your team and get more involved. So please take it away. Let us know what your groups are and how our listeners can participate.
Okay, just before I do that,
yeah.
I want to step back for just a second, because there was another point that I wanted to make about what we need to do, and that's really to be a voice once again to our local and national leaders. Politics plays such a big role, and so we really need the funding. The funding has been flatlined for so long that we really need to boost that up, because the epidemic is growing. So, and the cost of care is not growing. So we have more people with infection, but they're not getting the treatment. So we really need voices on Capitol Hill. Call your local city council members and really stress the importance for multi-levels of funding.
Absolutely, George. I totally agree. I think that basic level of civic engagement is probably one of our, most critical steps for saving the lives of our brothers and sisters with HIV. And I'm assuming that your organizations are a big part of that. But I agree that we absolutely positively need to let our members of our Congress and state houses know that this needs to be a major priority in this fight.
Yes.
Please let us know how can our listeners get involved and join join this amazing community.
Okay, we have a mobile unit that goes out to the community 3 days a week, and you can call our program director at 202-422-6396. Again, 202-422-6396 to find out the location for that van and go out and talk to our staff out there to see what needs to be taken care of. Or they can call the office here, 202-863-8450. Again, 202-863-8450. Or visit our website, www.startatwestminster, startatwestminster.org. And we can also be found on Facebook at Start at Westminster.
Okay, fantastic. George, thank you so much for joining us today. I felt this was a really productive discussion. I think it's given a lot of us a lot of, food to think about and given us some motivation for what needs to get done to help our fellow Americans with HIV. And I applaud your efforts, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you again.
All right, everybody. So that concludes the HIV segment of the Dr. America's show's Valentine's Day special. I am your host, Dr. Sanjeev Sriram, on the We Act Radio Network. We're going to have some closing thoughts when we come back. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.
All right, welcome back to the Dr. America Show. I am your host, Dr. Sanjeev Sriram, and we are on the We Act Radio Network. Thank you guys very much for joining us for today's Valentine's Day special. So this episode has covered a lot of ground. We've talked about love, we've talked about broken hearts, we've talked about HIV, and what some of the conversations and researching for my conversation with George about HIV and just thinking about my patients and how we seem to still be struggling with sexually transmitted diseases in 21st century America, I can't help but think about how we seem to be failing our young people when it comes to sexual health education. And the more that I practice in clinic and I think about this, I can't help but wonder how much we seem to be failing them on just their general health education. And then we seem to, really be fixated on how we teach them sex ed. But I kind of feel like we're missing a lot of health ed. And if I had to devise and develop a health education program that included sexual health education, I would say that we need to, start teaching health from a vantage point of enthusiasm and awe and wonder from a really early age. I feel that there's nothing wrong with teaching about this amazing human body, to kids as young as, 5 or 6 years old. I think, go ahead and start with something really simple like their senses. Being able to like help a child marvel at their eyes and their ears and their tongue and their skin. I think that, these are just things that we should be able to, have a childlike sense of awe and wonder. And in teaching kids that, we can teach them things like, oh, I don't know, when they turn 7 and they start losing, those baby teeth and start growing those adult teeth, that we can actually show them like, look, isn't this amazing that we get 2 sets of teeth in our lifetimes, and that if we really do a good job of taking care of ourselves, that these teeth will last us for the rest of our lives. And to really approach it with that sense of enthusiasm, optimism, and determination that you can do this, that this is something that we should take pride in, that our bodies are just amazing things, and that even doing the simple thought experiment with a kid and even with yourself of like, just look at your hand and think about the skin on this side of your hand versus the skin on this side of your hand. It's all one skin, but think about just how different your skin is on both sides of just one hand, and what that means for how, your hand experiences and touches the world and feels things and learns about what's in our environment. I find it marvel, like I still marvel at it, even though I'm a physician and I've been trained and all of that. Things like that still, spark this wonder in me, which I feel that, regardless of whether you believe that there was an intelligent design behind all of this, or whether this is, your skin is a product of evolution, to me, it doesn't take away from the fact that that what we have as bodies are just amazing, wonderful things, and that we should be willing and open to teach them with the sense of awe, wonder, and pride, and that we can help children kind of gradually understand that, okay, there's, your senses and your teeth, and then as they get older and their mind can kind of start developing an idea about abstraction, that you can kind of take them through body systems like, okay, what do lungs and hearts do? How do they actually make the air that we breathe function for our body? How does our heart actually keep blood pumping through our veins and arteries so that, we have circulation? What does it mean when we don't have that? Little by little, I feel like those are some of the basics. Even things like our digestive system is just amazing when you think about all the different kinds of food that we can eat and enjoy, and then have that turn into strength and power and nutrition for us. I feel like those are just marvelous processes to, for us to share with each other and learn from, so that we can, be really proud of the bodies that we inhabit in our lifetime. And I feel that the more that we're able to convey this value to our children, that when we eventually have to get to a place where we talk about puberty and going from childhood to teenage years and teenage years to adulthood, that we've built this comfort zone that is rooted in pride and self-respect and marvel and joy in being human, that when we have to talk about things that would otherwise seem uncomfortable, like how do our reproductive systems work, I think that we can actually get rid of the discomfort. I think that we can just talk about it very matter-of-factly with pride and be astonished, and again, just, enjoy the marvel of it all, so that our kids are, experiencing their health and experiencing health education from a completely different experience than what we've been doing so far, which is still rooted in stigma, shame, in, it's icky. I feel like a lot of that is hindering, my work as a physician. It's hindering the work of my colleagues in public health. And I think that we don't have to do this anymore. I feel that we have it in us, to talk about health and to talk about our bodies with pride and respect and awe, and to share that with our children. And that would actually be better for their health. I would love to see some kids in clinic who, can, really take some of that pride and take some of that self-respect and enjoy being human and, enjoy whatever health they do have. I feel like it's a precious thing that if we approach health education differently, we would actually be able to look at health more completely and more fully, and actually, enjoy it, and be positive and upbeat about it. There's no reason for us to be uncomfortable and icky about things when it comes to our health. Anyway, I want to thank you guys for listening to that little rant about sex ed. I felt that it was appropriate because, we are in Valentine's Day weekend and, it is on everybody's mind. And we need to have something to, move forward on. So thanks for listening. And I hope you guys get a lot out of this. Please check us out on Twitter at Dr. America Show. We've also got our Facebook page where we're going to have some of these resources up and running. And I am really excited to keep having these conversations with you guys. You've been listening to Dr. America. I am your host, Dr. Sanjeev Sriram, on the We Act Radio Network. And until next time, salud to your health.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.